Hey, good morning. Just got home from work. It was a long day, and I had wanted to cover an article, especially today with what we're seeing. We're going to talk a little bit about transgenderism and what the movement that we're seeing. We're seeing basically a lot of hospitals and governments, or our government, I should say, push people to adopt this ideology of if you feel you're a woman, etc., then you should go this route. And you're seeing people, young women cutting off their breasts. They've seen pictures of men who have cut off their penises and then created some sort of a pseudo vagina. You get some women that get their vaginal canal closed, and then they take either I've seen like where a piece of the forearm, they'll basically take a graft of the thigh and they'll try to turn that into a sort of a pseudo penis. And in my opinion, as a nurse, if you understand what went on in the early 1900s, America practiced eugenics. And the practice of eugenics is just basically a form of racism where people could look at you and say, you're blind, you don't deserve to reproduce. You have a low IQ, you don't deserve to reproduce. You're black, you're brown skin, etc. You're subhuman, you don't deserve to reproduce. And so, if you understand how the actual birth control pill was designed, it was designed for the purpose of depopulating minorities, overwhelmingly the black population. And I did a video talking about this not too long ago, talking about how in 2022, the liberal, when they were pushing for abortion and they had all that stuff going on with the Supreme Court, and a lot of liberals came to find out that Margaret Sanger had made some racist remarks, basically to the point where she had said, in terms of Planned Parenthood, that we're going to, in essence, infiltrate these neighborhoods and we're going to get the black politician involved, we're going to get the black pastor involved, because if the purpose was, as she had stated, to reduce, as she said, the Negro population. And so the very first clinic, I use that word in quotes, for Planned Parenthood was in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And the pill was first tested on women in Puerto Rico. And they gave them, in essence, what amounted to sterilization. And of course, they didn't tell these women that that's what they were doing. And it was because what this specific doctor, I figured off the top of my head, what he was doing was it was illegal. It was illegal for him to test on people, and of course he had lied. But by the time it all came out, he in essence discovered that if we use this particular hormone, we can basically block women from being able to reproduce. And this was geared and designed towards minorities. And so this was the same case. So as time goes by, and these people, of course, are racists, you have to tweak the message. For example, in the Bible, the Apostle Peter said, as Christians, when we want to convey a message to people, he had said to season your words with salt. And of course, salt has the ability to preserve, correct? And of course, it makes things more palatable. And that was basically his point, that when we speak to people, we want to speak in a way that preserves a relationship. And what we speak, we want it to be palatable to those who are listening to us. And so this was the same sort of tactic that was used. And that's why you hear people talk about, we're fighting for your reproductive rights. And these people, of course, unknowingly are being targeted for depopulation. But of course, it's propagandized to them in a way that it is palatable to them, right? If white people were saying, like Margaret Sanger, as she had said straightforwardly, that we want to depopulate the Negro people, well, people aren't going to go for that. And so she had said, well, that's why we need to get the black pastor involved and why we need to get the black politician involved. Because just in case we get some people that are a little smart and they pick up what we're doing, well, then we need the black pastor and the black politician to basically be the front man for us, to be like the blocker and be like, oh, these people are crazy, don't listen to them, etc. Because most of the people at that time, this is in the early 1900s, that were running the clinic were white people. And so the black people were a little suspect, right? And so this is one of the reasons why many black Americans didn't take the COVID jab, because they remembered the multiple times, for example, like in the Tuskegee, what happened in Tuskegee, that black Americans have been targeted by the government for the purpose of testing on them, basically, right? Like guinea pigs. And this basically was, even though many people look at what the Nazis had done in Germany, where they did a lot of testing, a lot of that started in America. A lot of that concept of sterilization and eugenics was actually first started in the United States and made its way to Europe. And so we're now finally getting into this article. We're talking about, this was an article that actually came out of Michigan State Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation. And the title of the article, and I'll leave the link of it, of course, because I don't have my computer set up, so I'm just looking at it off my laptop. And we're just going to touch on this a little bit. The article is entitled "Forced Sterilization Policies in the U.S. Targeted Minorities and Those with Disabilities and Lasted into the 21st Century." And I would argue that it still goes on today. It says the U.S. had a long history of forced sterilization campaigns that were driven by the bogus science of eugenics, racism, and sexism. And it said forced, and this was actually practiced overwhelmingly in places like California. Shocker. Forced sterilization policies in the U.S. targeted minorities and those with disabilities. It goes on to talk about a young woman whose original name was basically removed. As it says, it was redacted, and she was a young 20-year-old black girl by the name of Bertha. This is what they named her. And so the reason was because, according to them, she had a low IQ of 62, and she was both aggressive and was sexually promiscuous. And of course, they says she had been orphaned as a child and had a limited education. It says likely because of her low IQ, the medical board, determined that she was not capable of rehabilitation. And so, of course, like I said, a very palatable phrase that they use was that it says here that she was targeted for, or is it? There's a phrase here that they use. It says for protection of sterilization. This was a term that they used. Instead, the board recommended the protection of sterilization for Bertha because she was feeble-minded and deemed unable to assume responsibility for herself or for her child. It says without her input, the Bertha's guardian signed the paperwork for her to be sterilized. And this actually happened to many black women in jail. Many women who were in jail in the early 1900s, I think it was all the way up into the 70s, were sterilized. And so the article talks about other individuals and the practice of sterilization. And obviously, as time has gone by, it would be difficult for hospitals and the government to do this legally because you get too many people that would complain, right? Think about what happened to that former military officer in Canada, and she had requested for like a lift chair to help her get up the stairs, and I believe the reply to her was, "No, but we can offer you to be euthanized." That was the reply to her. And of course, many people read that and found that to be offensive. Now think of it today from the standpoint of what is going on with many young people who overwhelmingly are being propagandized to transition. Of course they're targeting the young. Why? Like all predators typically target the young who lack experience. They're more vulnerable, and of course elderly people and weak individuals. And this is typically who many of these people target. And of course, because they can't go out and legally do this because of reprisal from people, right? We wouldn't allow this sort of thing. But what you can do is you can sterilize people by getting them to believe that as a man, I actually am a woman. And you have doctors that are willfully going along with this, where they're taking their sex organs that these individuals were born with, and they're basically making them unable to reproduce, basically sterilizing them. And of course, Charlie Munger had made the point where he had said, if you show me the incentive, I will show you the outcome, right? A perfect example is during COVID. The government paid $500 for every PCR that people who came into the hospital were swabbed with, right? You show me the incentive. That's why Donald Trump had made the point, well, everybody in the hospital is COVID, right? Why? Because that was the incentive. What was the outcome? Everybody is COVID. Because there's a financial incentive. Same thing with farmers, where the government says we're going to pay you to plant corn. The free market might only pay X amount, but the government will pay more. So what is the incentive? Are you going to go out and grow wheat or grow soybeans, or are you going to grow corn, which is gonna the government is going to pay a higher price for? That becomes the incentive. The outcome is farmers will produce corn. And so today we're seeing that exact same thing. You give people special privileges. You kind of, in essence, protect them. We saw this with women versus men. And now we're seeing this very same thing with many young people who may be confused about what's going on with their body, especially when you're that young and you're going through many changes, especially mentally, because your body is obviously growing, but the mind takes longer to grow. Some people take into their 30s before they're fully mature, and that's why they target many of these young people. It's for the purpose of depopulation and sterilization. Because what's the outcome? Is it the outcome that these people live better lives? Are they more able to get along with people in society? Or do they become even more estranged from society? And this is why the government, and especially with many conservatives, this is why they target your children. Because they know that there will be a visceral retribution. People will become very upset, and naturally the tendency will be to hate such individuals. And of course, because many of these individuals are already mentally unstable, but with the protection of the government and with the police, they push forward with this narrative. But in my opinion, as a nurse, and understanding and having read many of the articles that were talking about depopulation, this is why, I had done some research a while ago where in the early 1900s, when countries would ask America for financial aid because they were the world reserve currency. And so when governments needed loans, part of the deal for those loans was, for example, America did this with India way back, where America said, we'll give you the loan, but you have to push this narrative of depopulation. You have to push women into education, because educated women obviously push off childbirth. This is one of the reasons. This was actually a study that was done in the early 1900s that talked about this. How do we slow down and reduce population? Educate women. And so this was the narrative of pushing many of these women, instead of having kids and being wives and being mothers, they indoctrinated many of these women to, in essence, depopulate, not have children, or maybe have one children. And this narrative that carried over from the early 1900s, we are still experiencing that today. I mean, shoot, you had recently Kamala Harris on openly talk about this on TV, where that we need to invest into depopulation so that there will be more resources for the rest of us. And people become so comfortable in talking about this. At the end of the day, it's just racism. At the end of the day, it's just racism. Because overwhelmingly, who do they target? They target people of color. They typically target blacks. This is why most Planned Parenthoods end up in black neighborhoods. And this is just a route many of these, and I mean, shit, you look at things like Charles Darwinism. His original work was based off of racism, right? The survival of the fittest. And overwhelmingly, it showed how white people were the superior race, right? You look at individuals like Hitler, right? The blue hair, the blonde eyes, these were the superior people. And you see this sort of same narrative if you watch that video talking about how, I don't know if it was a meme or whatnot, where there was like an engineer who said that we can basically grow babies in like these little incubators. And how did they try to sell it to women? Oh, now you don't have to get pregnant. You don't have to worry about your body changing. You don't have to worry about, C-sections and things like that, right? What did I say? Like the Apostle Peter. make your words more palatable. Season your words with salt. They're not going to sit here and say, we want to create a master race of people. They even say it in that video, how you can pick and choose your traits if you want to be tall or short, if you want to have different characteristics. What type of characteristics do you think that they're going to push? It will always be about the same sort of an agenda. But many young women have been indoctrinated, right? Because of the narrative. We're fighting for your reproductive rights. That sounds a lot better than saying we got too many damn Latinos. We need to sterilize these Latinas. And of course, if they were to say that, that would get people upset. But if you say, hey, we're fighting for your reproductive rights, well, then that becomes more palatable to people. And many of the narratives that are going on today are very much like that. And it takes a shrewd and experienced individual to basically spot these things. Like King Solomon had said, the machinations, the works of the devil are manifest and they're evident, in that it takes a shrewd person to see the calamity and proceed to conceal themselves. Many people realize that. Many Black Americans realized that during COVID. They were shrewd. They remembered what had happened to their people in the past, and they didn't go that route. They were shrewd and proceeded to conceal themselves from the outcome of what had happened to many people. That's why you look at things like myocarditis and heart attacks that were on the rise. You look at miscarriages. There was a huge spike in miscarriages in 2022 and in 2021. And this is the reality. Many women lost their babies. And of course, from the hospital standpoint, doctors were not going to say, well, maybe it was the jab, because of fear of reprisal. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to get their license pulled because they would get targeted. But it's the people. It's the people that suffer. And overwhelmingly, it's often the minorities and the poor who suffered from this. And so going back to talking about eugenics and the trans community, who are the people that are typically going to fall for this sort of a narrative? And this is how they sort of view people, that if you're foolish enough to fall victim to this, well, in essence, you selected yourself. This is why the politicians, after the fact, can say, hey, nobody forced you to take it. You see Justin Trudeau, you see, Joe Biden, many of the politicians in Australia, literally on TV, gaslighting the shit out of you, saying, hey, nobody told you to take it. I remember one of the politicians in Australia, because someone had passed away after taking the jab, and a reporter asked him, it's like an old white guy with glasses, got gray hair, I forget the guy's name, but I remember watching this shit on TV. And the guy basically said, because the reporter had said someone had passed away, and he said, hey, if you take it and you die, that's your fault. I'm like, holy shit, how do you say that when you're literally telling people, if you don't take it, you can't work. If you don't take it, you're not going to be able to leave your house and do this and do that. But at the end of the day, this is how they feel about many of the people. And so you have to be shrewd, as the Apostle Paul said, that the days that we live in, you have to walk as not as unwise, but as wise people, because the days are wicked. And many people, unfortunately, are not shrewd and do not have the ability to conceal themselves. It's why we have to speak up. As Jesus said, if we don't speak up, the rocks would cry out. And it is our responsibility to speak up in behalf of the people who maybe are not smart enough or not brave enough to speak up for themselves. And as much as the government might try to pit people against people, it is our responsibility, as Jesus said, that people would know the difference between someone who wanted to serve God and someone who didn't. As Jesus said, all will know that you really are my disciples if you have love for one another. And so instead of looking at these individuals and hating them, we have to realize that they're being abused. These are people who are on the fringes of society, and they're being targeted by the government. The Bible says that Satan walks around like a roaring lion, seeking to devour someone. And like a predator, who do they typically target? They target the young, they target the elderly, the weak, and the ones that are away from the herd. That's why you see many of the mass shootings. Who are they? Are they these very popular young men? Or are they young men who are on the fringes of society that people are not paying attention to? They get propagandized to, and the next thing you know, they're committing acts of violence. Just look at the young man that committed all those acts of in Uvalde. Look at the last couple of mass shooters. Who were they? They were young trans people, people who identified as trans. We have to look past the propaganda, and we have to look at these things and keep in mind that it is not just a political war that is being waged among the people, that it is a spiritual war. As the Apostle Paul said, that we have a war not against flesh and blood, but against the spirit forces in the heavenly places. And that's why people can look at this stuff and say, this stuff is demonic, because it is. Because the devil hates humanity. And if he can get people to, in essence, cut themselves off from the ability to know God and have the ability to experience everlasting life, then he will do that. And he'll use as I forgot, I think it was Apostle Paul or John who had said that Satan transforms himself into an angel of light. So it's nothing to be considered that his servants transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, right? They pretend that they're doing the right thing on our behalf, but really they're nothing more than servants of the agents of the devil. And we can't allow these people to put enmity, hatred between one group and another, because it means people's lives. Not only does it mean their lives currently, but it means their lives in God's kingdom. And this is something that we need to keep into consideration when dealing with many of these individuals. When I come across them in the hospital, overwhelmingly, many of these people come in with drug abuse, alcoholism, and many other different mental depression, anxiety, etc. These are not the pictures of health. They're not who people want to be in society. And they're being propagandized to, and they're being misled. And it is our responsibility, when we see these individuals on the fringes of society, we have to bring them and embrace them into the herd and try to show them a better way of life, instead of just pushing them out there and making them feel dejected and abandoned by society. This is why in Jesus' day, they brought him a woman who was a prostitute, and they said, look, this woman was selling herself. And of course, they were ready to stone her. And many people on the right look at many transgendered people that way. They look, this person is doing this wickedness. This person is worthy of death. And Jesus said, you were right, but let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And of course, the reaction by the crowd was that they realized that they were all sinners, all worthy of death. All of us are. We are all sinners and all fall short of the glory of God. And as Jesus said, that he who gives judgment without mercy will himself experience that exact same type of judgment. So keep this in mind when you're dealing with many of these people that are plagued mentally. Some of them may be attacked by the demons. The demons love to gang up on people, right? Remember the man that Jesus met? We are legion, right? When he asked, who are you that was possessing this man? And he said, we are legion, for we are many. And the demons love to gang up on many of these people. And of course, it results in a lifestyle of drug abuse, alcoholism. Many of these people harm themselves. And of course, the government is pushing this because, as the Bible says, we know that the whole world lies in the power of the wicked one. And that includes governments. That is why the Bible calls them beasts of the system of things. It is what it is, and we have to keep this in mind. It is a spiritual war that is being waged for your very life and the life of these individuals. Keep that in mind. Try to be encouraging to these people, because the outcome is that many of these people will die. Anyway, this video is very long, a lot longer than I wanted to be. Thanks for watching. Feel free to leave your comment below, and I'll check you next time.